Thank you all for joining us for our town hall portion of our symposium. First, we'll start off with our artist, Pages Matam. Pages is a Cameroonian artist. He is author of The Heart of Comet, the 2014 National Poetry Slam champion, and winner of Beltway Poetry Quarterly's Best New Book of 2014. Let's welcome Pages Matam.
Check. I have a lav on, so I'm just making sure. There we go. Beautiful. We're here. I'm gonna shift this way. Beautiful. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap one time. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap 2 times. If you're feeling good, say yeah. If you're feeling real good, say yeah. Y'all are so beautiful. My name is Pages Matam. I am the director of poetry events and programming for Busboys and Poets. I am, it's a thing. Writer, author, educator, and it feels good to be here. Thank you so much for having me, for all of the important dialogue and conversations that have happened today. And I look forward to conversing with a lot more of you for the next hour or so. So I am originally from Cameroon, Central Africa. That's where I was born and raised. And so this first piece that I want to kind of start off with speaks a little bit to my immigrant experience. My coming into this country, the things that I've kind of learned over the years being here, and really having, most of all, my relationship with language. Before we get into it though, I guess by the applause for Busboys and Poets, you've all been to like open mics. Who's been to like an open mic before or like a poetry thing? Okay, some of y'all, so for the rest of you muggles, I need you to turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor. It's time to turn up. Say, neighbor. It's time to turn up. So one way that you can turn up, you can snap your fingers. Everybody snap their fingers, right? You hear something that you like, you can snap your fingers, because we have this whole thing that like poetry is not like golf, right? You don't have to wait till like the poem is over and be like, oh, good volley, okay. So you don't have to do that. You can snap your fingers. You can make the chocolate stuck at the roof of your mouth noise. It kind of sounds like On the count of 3, can we get a collective 1, 2, 3? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So as an educator, like a lot of my students nowadays, anytime that they hear a dope poem or we're watching a video or something that they like to go, yas, right? So like, it's definitely a thing, but you gotta do it with the arm wave or else it doesn't count. You gotta do the whole thing together, right? So on the count of 3, can we get a collective yas going? 1, 2, 3? Beautiful, beautiful. So you have this vast array of options to show love to the stage, and the stage is gonna show you that love right back. Show that love for the entire time that we are here, to all of our panelists, not just myself, and for all the beautiful people that have helped organize this event and that are taking part in this event, yeah? So let's get into it. When I say spoken, y'all say word, spoken. Word. Spoken. Word. Adina seba, l'anglais lingana titi. Mwende na di pa bol pa l'anglais. L'anglais n'est que ma 4e langue. English is only my 4th language. It is the baby of the family, the one my mouth spoils, favorite by default, who may one day be sold off by its siblings in hopes to never return because all of my other tongues have grown so jealous. In my country of Cameroon, we have over 200 dialects. That's over 200 ways to say love, to say family, to say I belong to something that does not want to kill me, that does not want to siphon the gold from my flesh or the stories from my bones. See, I was a house once, full of stories. One for this American dream, the other is me, still trying to translate the catacomb accents of my parents' tongues when they would say, you have become so American now. What they would mean is, deport all of that tribe from your mouth. You talk like them now. You walk like them now. No more of that Yaoundé Cameroon stuck in my teeth. Now everything tastes like the steps to unbirthing a country, which is to say that America has a way of killing everything it comes from. A passport can feel like a smooth stamped death sentence. So I learned early how to fold myself into a flag, stitch myself a newly striped name, a new set of stars. I was able to pass through customs, but my tongue had to stay behind, which is to say, I remember when I was too black for Africans and too African for blacks, but all a meaningless story in America. My name was thick in chemically enhanced amendments. My name was wishing for a white picket flesh while living with Section 8 bones, which is to say that you can be a house, but America has a way of reminding you that you are not a home. You're only the debris, the aftermath, the constant reconstruction, the projects. They say that you don't belong in the country that doesn't even belong to itself. But oh, America, I mean, show us your papers. I mean, who documented your dream? I mean, can the attack dogs still smell the unenable right from my brittle and marginalized skin? Because I know that the bullet does not care which side of the ocean I am from. It will swim through my body all the same. It will try to make a home of me until my name is but a salted exit wound. But I know that my tongue is still patiently awaiting for my return. Yet I still wonder if I'll still feel like a stranger in my own house, which is to say, I hope to grow up to one day become a language that is always worth coming home to. Word. Word. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Shout out to language and shout out to moms for all of the values and things that she's instilled into me, and about always like remembering and knowing where you came from, right? And never forgetting that. Especially for one like myself, who where being a creative and having artistry as being like my main profession, it's not really a thing where I'm from. You know what I'm saying? When you're born, you get two options. You either become a doctor or a lawyer. That's about it, right? And if you really, really messed up, an engineer. That's as far as it goes. That's as far as it goes, right? But I know that a lot of the things that my mom was scared of for me growing up, she just wanted always the best for me. Even though at one point it was just this one-dimensional way of looking at it. But I've opened her up to other ways, and these other ways that I also try to instill into my own students, right? My students are some of the most brilliant human beings I've ever gotten to meet. As much as they get to learn from me, I learn from them every single day. And I remember particularly, we were studying a poet by the name of Ross Gay. Incredible, incredible poet. And his most recent collection is called The Catalog of an Abashed Gratitude. And it's a collection that's really about self-care. The entire theme of it is about self-care. He's a self-proclaimed black hippie, right? And a lot of the works is about horticulture and using the metaphors of the earth and gardening and taking care of the environment around you. He uses all of that as a metaphor for really taking care of the environment and the gardening of self. All right, and so we're studying this book, and it leads into this whole conversation about saving the earth and all of that jazz, right? And one of my students, he goes, why is it so important, to care about saving the earth? It's always going to be dirty anyway. No one cares, right? And I looked to him and I'm like, well, you can't really think like that. It's important that we take care, like, of the place that we borrow, like, both a home and food from, or else, like, we'll end up going extinct right with it, right? And then one of my other students, and I will never forget this, he raises his hand and he goes, well, Mr. Pages, as a black boy in this country, I already feel like I'm going extinct, so I really don't care about what you have to say on that, right? And so I'm like, accurate, for one. Two, let's unpack that. And what does that actually mean? And getting them to write a little bit about it. And it also got me thinking about what exactly does that perspective mean? Because when you hear that tigers are endangered and almost extinct due to climate change, loss of habitat, human-wildlife conflict, and hunters, you do not hear the World Wildlife Fund say, but hey, what about the rest of the animals? I mean, they're all also violent. Look at all of this tiger-on-tiger crime they're committing anyway, right? Or when you hear of the rafflesia flower or the Venus flytrap under the threat of deforestation and global warming, you don't see an advocacy for roses to no longer be used on Valentine's Day, hashtag all flowers matter. You don't hear, giant pandas being told, hey, if you don't like it here, you can go back to China. And maybe if you didn't have biracial fur like the rest of the regular bears, then there might be more of you alive, all right? Then there might be more of us alive when my students walk into my classroom and they say, hey, did you hear about, and yet another name falls from their mouth like a tree in this darkest of forests. All I can think to myself is, whose human rights are really in conflict when you looked at all of the hunters often with badges dressed in blue, are armed with all of their policies and dossiers, who don't see color but always know when you don't belong, whose tongues suddenly go into hibernation when it is most convenient. Silence is a deadly forest fire, and we are often its most ready feast. So they see a flower to be plucked instead of just a woman trying to get home. They see a prey instead of just a sleeping baby girl. They see a tiger instead of just a boy or a mountaintop, or an upside-down rainbow stitched onto a brown sky. How so many of us want oxygen because we're so often treated like carbon dioxide, so every day's new breath is a celebration for the ones that we still have, the ones that we want to protect, like my students, so that their breaths won't be recycled prematurely into mine. You know, it gets so hard. It gets so hard to care about saving the environment when every day we're still learning how to save ourselves. I mean, why care about saving the world when every day you remind us that we don't deserve to live in it? Why care about the trees when all you do is remind us of the noose? See, extinction becomes all too familiar when you're always being branded pollution before population. I mean, you hear climate change, but we see gentrification, how easily a zip code can become a food desert. You hear global warming, we say our streets have been on fire. So when you see us dancing and singing and marching and praising in a world that always wants to see us burn, this is how we raise ourselves from the ash, how we photosynthesize our hearts, how we plant a garden of hallelujahs, hallelujahs, hallelujah, and praise. Praise all of the breaths that are still here. This is how we praise all of the breaths that are still blooming. Thank you.
Thank you, Pages. Let's move on to our town hall. Would Juan Williams join us?
There we go. So we're going to do the town hall now, and the town hall really is an opportunity for all of you to continue the conversation you had in the main hall a moment ago. So in keeping with that wonderful performance, and I honor you, I thought that was wonderful. I really did. I appreciate it. So in keeping with that wonderful mood that you've set for us to talk, neighbor, let's get it started. You know, let's talk to each other. Let's not talk at each other. Let's not talk about each other. Let's talk with each other in a true spirit of sharing that I think has been characteristic of what the Aspen Institute State of Race in America Conference has been this year. Just an outstanding success. Let me start with Richard. Richard, I really thought the first panel was so outstanding, in part because I thought people spoke again from the heart about this notion of wealth gap. What would you add after that session? Do we have mics for other people, Kiana?
Or do we speak loudly, right?
Okay.
Well, Juan, I think that we, as all of you who are watching could tell, is that we just scratched the surface of a very important dynamic when we talk about race in America. And we've talked about this every year. You've been here leading it. We talk about wealth. We talk about home ownership. And unfortunately, we don't see that getting closer. That key sort of two lines that we saw in our conversation. So I think what we missed is a lot of stuff. It's not only home ownership, it's income, it's jobs.
Right.
Jobs for those who don't have jobs, those who want to close that gap. We didn't even touch that. That's a topic we could certainly dive into.
All right. Anybody want to jump in here? This is your opportunity to add your voice to the conversation.
I have a question, maybe not necessarily related to that, but there's been a lot of talk about social media. There's been a lot of talk about bringing people from different backgrounds to the table, so we all talk about this. But as we go through this peregrination. Thank you. As we go through this peregrination of social media, it seems that there has been a movement towards narcissism and just self-indulgence. How do we encourage collective responsibility and encourage a feeling of activism where we do try to encourage all of us to unite together to solve and ameliorate some of these societal ills?
That's wonderful. I think part of it is what we're trying to do today is to have a real conversation, get people engaged, not afraid. I think people said in one of the panels, oftentimes there's a fear of saying the wrong thing or people saying, hey, you have a chip on your shoulder, or you have a hole in your heart. I mean, people want to immediately put you in some box that they can ignore. But this is an opportunity to speak out, so I really appreciate that, because we want people to engage as a first step towards organizing, activism, making a difference in this life. Is there another person who wants to add to the conversation?
Hi, and going back to your first question there, I would love to hear more from everyone here about how we can advance wealth in the Black community, not just talking about education or jobs and income, but in terms of businesses. And I heard mention of generational wealth transfers, and what proportion of wealth is transferred through business ownership, and what is happening in the Black community and people of color, their communities there as well.
Well, I think part of the answer is, I think the primary transfer mechanism is real estate. I think we heard that earlier. Do you want to jump in here and
Beyond
help us
real
with this?
estate. My family, they're small business owners.
They're
so
small
really
business owners. I'm saying primarily I think it's real estate, but you're pointing to business transfer and developing more business or entrepreneurs in the Black community specifically.
I think you're seeing a lot more of that now. I think there's a lot more interest in entrepreneurship because people feel left out of the job market, so they're trying, and we as people of color, we've always had to do for ourselves. So a lot of the small businesses that are out there, I've actually spoken to experts in this space who say they're very, very small. These are like micro businesses, that are often created to support, needs within the community. So that could be, you're doing hair or your nails or, some other sort of need within the food service community, something like that. Whether that's transferable or not, I think it depends. I don't have the success rate for businesses, small business owners of color, and how often those businesses are able to be transferred. But I think we also need to think about, and I mentioned this earlier in the panel, think about debt. Oftentimes we take on more than we can pay back. And a lot of that, when I was answering the question about the 401k, sometimes communities of color, we're also using our retirement to plug the gap with debt. So I think debt is often the thing that really captures us and keeps us unable to pass anything on and unable to move on. So whether that's, a house or a small business, we have to think about how much debt we're taking on and how long it's going to take us to pay that back.
But in this generation, are you seeing more business startups?
I think there's
In
more of an
minority- in the
interest.
minority community.
Yeah. I think there's absolutely more of an interest in doing that, and the question is there capital, for that? And if you look at the president's 10-point plan for Black America, one of the things he talks about in that 10-point plan is opening up access to capital and credit. But the folks that I speak to say that's great, but again, credit means debt. So we have to look at both sides of what that means, and it's a tricky situation. But I think people are less likely to work at companies for 20, 30 years like they used to, because they know they're not going to get a pension. They know they're not going to get some of the benefits. They know, so they're much more, eager to kind of work one place or two places or even start their own thing.
Let me borrow this one. Tom?
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. Let me just add a couple of data points and hopefully an insight or two. There actually is a greater rate of business and entrepreneurship formation in communities of color than in the white community. Period. Full stop. The so-called failure rate, however, is also much greater. That is, they don't last as long. One of the biggest obstacles is the capitalization question. It's both the financial literacy and skills, but it's the access to affordable capital that allows a business to grow. Unfortunately, most of those businesses tend to be relatively small. And then a last...
Well, before you go on, so what kind of businesses are we talking about? And are these Black and Hispanic men or women who are typically
So
the entrepreneurs?
it's both. In the African American community, it tends to be more female. Mass incarceration plays a huge role in that. In the Hispanic community, it tends to be a little bit more balanced, more towards the 50-50.
And you said there's small businesses, so I'm thinking things like food or cosmetics or...
As service delivery, especially for people in a community of color, whether it be retail or wholesale. The point I would add is that we tend to think of businesses as binary. somebody's a business person or they're a worker. I'm convinced, and we're starting to look at some of the data, there's much more a weaving in and out, having to do with the labor market at any point in time, where beginning to do a consultancy, starting a small business is often a way of patching income together that adds on to a very fragile job or work hours that have been cut back. So the binary between worker entrepreneur is I think, a little suspect. And as the economy has become more fragile, we're seeing, I think, actually much more of that kind of business formation that is really a way of if you will, owning the employment that used to pay you a decent paycheck.
You mean the worker gains some knowledge base, may then find themselves in a fragile position or laid off and decide to start their own?
Yes, I think that's exactly part of what's happening, and they may go back at some point into the paid workforce with a different, higher set of skills and a better job because of it.
Wow, so there's benefit beyond just transfer of wealth. I mean, there's transfer of knowledge and experience.
So my frustration with regard to business is we are on the precipice of a massive boom in an industry across this country because of the legalization of marijuana in several states. And for someone who saw the decimation of communities, my community, for people who were selling marijuana, for that industry now to be, I watched this, I don't know what it was the other day, but it was a conference about how much business there is to be made in the marijuana industry. No people of color. And I'm wondering, what do we do first to just get in the door, but second, to sort of view it not as reparations, but like maybe it's just the right thing to do, that we get a bigger piece of the pie of this industry in particular, given what it's done to us in our history.
Good point.
When we talk about the wealth gap, there's another opportunity that I think should not be overlooked, and that has to do with technology. We're in the fourth industrial revolution right now, and it's possible to gain quite a bit of wealth without material resources. What you need is access to educational capital, and to make sure that young people have access to STEM educations and they're able to move into that pipeline, and then once they do, to get access to venture capital. Because this is the kind of thing that would make a real difference in terms of closing the wealth gap. If you look at how much money is made in places like California and in the business corridor and in Boston, and even here on the way out to Reston, from people who start basically almost like immigrants with 2 pennies that they can barely rub together, but they have educational capital and they have an idea, and once they get the VC for that, the venture capital, they're able to make millions. And if women and if people of color can gain access to that kind of capital and entry to those doors, it could really make a difference.
Well, don't stop, don't sit down. So what's the obstacle here, Michele?
It's lack of education. I mean, if you look at the numbers, and I don't have my phone with me, so I can't pull them all out, but maybe I can call on my sister Tanzina, who could like call this up. But if you look at the statistics of the number of women and the number of young people of color who have access to STEM education, it's just sad. And it's not just entering the door, it's making sure that they see the finish line, because the retention rates are also quite low for people who enter into STEM fields. And so people like Freeman Habrowski, he's making a difference, finger snaps for Freeman in
Really?
Baltimore. But there are so many people who are missing out on that opportunity, and not just in terms of getting VC capital, also getting jobs in a lot of these organizations, because they don't have those kinds of skills. And it's a gamut. I mean, right now, even to get a job in a place like Detroit, if you want to work on a factory line, or if you want to work just up the, where they make tractors, just up in Gaithersburg or Jessup, they're no longer looking for muscles. They're no longer looking for strong backs. They're looking for people who have very, at minimum, certain computing skills, who know how to do basic coding in order to get those kinds of jobs. So that is a key factor in trying to
How we change that around. Why don't you hand the microphone back there for me, Michele?
I understand what you're saying, but I do think there is a bigger problem than that, right? In the sense of, because what you've described is basically a pipeline problem. And what we know in regards to getting, especially getting jobs in tech, is that right now, they are there. There's 19% of higher education, African Americans graduate with engineering degrees and coding degrees and those things. It's getting that network to getting them hired. So there is a lot, if we look at you know, the numbers of the people graduating from higher institutions with these types of degrees, but we still look at Facebook and Google and Twitter and the number of people, minorities that are hired and work there, that goes from, you know, about 20% to less than 1%. So
And what do you think's the reason for that?
I think I don't know the exact answer. I think there's a lot of smart people trying to figure that out. But I do think, but I do think it's not just the fact that they don't exist. They do exist. I do think it's a network issue trying to get, you know, those networks of the Stanford universities or something of that nature to pull and elevate those folks up, those individuals up, to get them into a place where then they can pull the next generation up.
Pages, you were laughing. You know, you're the star of the show, and you're laughing over here because you think racism is the answer? Yeah. Well, okay, there you go.
Plainly and simply, I mean, it's unfortunately it's the answer in so many things. I mean, when we talk about all this level of, you know, the access and stuff, we're thinking about who are those gatekeepers, right? Who are the people that are denying that access, right? And why are they denying that access, right?
Well, what do you hear Michele say, though? We got to do better with the STEM education. And we got to do better with seeing the opportunity, especially for people who have, as Michele said, 2 pennies to rub together. So if you just have a little something, but you see opportunity there, am I getting this right for you? She's saying, okay, hang on, that she's saying there is opportunity there, and he's saying there is opportunity, but we don't see why young people aren't filling in or rushing in to this STEM gap.
Yeah,
But they don't exist.
right.
I'm going to get to everybody, and my back's been unfortunately turned. I'm going to come that way, but go ahead, finish up.
No, it's like, yeah, I mean, the opportunities are there. We know they're there. We know they exist. I mean, it's the reason why we there's this thrive in this entire country. It's the reason why, you know, my mother had me come here, because she knew that there's so much greater opportunities here than there are in other places. But then when you actually, you know, you actually get to the opportunity and you stand there, it's like, all right, so here I am. I'm at the opportunity. I'm ready to, you know, step in there. And then you have somebody that's there, well, actually, you don't look like the kind of person that I want to actually have this opportunity, so that's not going to happen for you right now, right?
One piece, and I'll pass it on, about the tech sector that's interesting, though, and when we talk about these opportunities, you're talking about an industry that's grown by Fibonacci numbers. I mean, it's just grown almost overnight. And the bias is so subtly embedded, and it happened in such an interesting way that it's not necessarily that people say, I don't want that person because they don't look the right way or they don't have the right resume. There are 2 things that seem to be happening. One is that it happened so quickly, and it happened with people who thought they're on the right side of this issue. And yet, when they grow this quickly, you go from 5 employees to 50 employees to 5,000 employees. What do you do when you do that? You reach for the part of your, I was about to say Rolodex again, but you reach for the part of your contact list that you're comfortable with. And then they reach for the part of their contact list that they're comfortable with. And before you know, you have a Facebook or a Google, and you don't have the kind of diversity that's like baked in.
Here.
I'm sorry, I have to say something about the race issue. My great-great-grandparents dealt with more racism than anyone in this room will ever deal with. We have always been faced with racism in this country. Yet, in spite of that, we have thrived. Opening up those doors to STEM opportunities requires awareness, it requires dedication, it requires focus. There is no hurdle in this country that we as people of color have not been able to bridge. No, we have to stop saying that. Understand it exists. It's real. I get that. But in spite of that, we have to pass it on to our children. There's been a gap somewhere between the generations. Something we missed. We didn't pass down correctly. Because there's a huge gap between those kids that are incarcerated and the time that I grew up. And I'm trying to figure that out. What is that gap, Mr. Williams? What did we miss? If I wasn't in the house before the lights came on, there was a belt waiting for me. And nobody called social services. If you didn't do your homework, you didn't get your little allowance. And I didn't get $50 a week, and I'm an only child. You got what your mom, after you, there's a huge, it's a culture issue that we are missing. We can say it's racism. We can say it's lack of opportunity. It is about awareness. It is about teaching our children, passing down the lessons that our forefathers taught us. It is about dedicating ourselves. The monster is in front of us. We either go through him, round him, upside down him, whatever, but we figure out a way to get through it. I'm a diversity officer. I'm always looking for talent. The pipeline. We have a certain percentage of minorities and women at the top in private industry, in the federal government, in public sector. When they retired, and we've been beating these poor people to death because they're the ones we constantly turn to, who will follow in their footsteps? We don't have anybody in the pipeline. It takes anywhere from 20 to 25 years to grow an executive if you do it right. Any more? No. People want to be an executive as soon as they step out of college. Are you serious? I mean, we have really lost. There's a huge knowledge gap. There's a huge moral gap. There's a huge social gap that we are missing in this country. And until we deal with that, finding jobs are the least of our problems.
Let me switch sides of the room here.
So I want to say something about access. So in the early 90s, which tells you how old I am, we were doing surveys to find out exactly what was going on in organizations around this whole thing of hiring people of color, particularly in technology. And I started out in technology in Boston, Massachusetts. And one of the things that was found was that people hire for comfort. And it's really amazing what comfort means to those who are hiring. And for the most part, what it often means is somebody who looks like me, has the same socioeconomic background, has had a similar education than myself. And the other thing that's put out there a lot is we just don't get enough qualified candidates, people of color who are qualified for our organization. What are the qualifications? Because education in this country is standardized. So if you got a degree, it was a standard degree for whatever it is. So when you break it down, it actually is a social thing, and having connections in the right places isn't always something that people of color have access to.
Did any of you want to jump in here? Oh, hang on a second. Let me just go. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, bro.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you very much. So this is going back to the point about people, but also black teenagers not being in the STEM program. That I planned on going to the STEM program. I planned to be a mechanical engineer and computer scientist. But for the most part, nobody coaxed you into going into that. Yeah, we talk about how teenagers aren't in it or they're not interested in it, but you're not appealing to their senses. If you make them interested in that field, then they're going to go into it. But for people like me who are already going to that field, there's going to be some line down there where I might not get a certain position because of racism, or I may like a certain skill. But the bottom line is we can't blame 100,000%, that's not even a real number, that teenagers aren't taking that step, because 9 times out of 10, if a teenager doesn't understand something, they're going to get frustrated and quit. And yeah, that's not something that y'all want to hear, but it's the fact of the matter, and y'all have to break it down to some of us to get us to that level where we're like, okay, I get it, and I want to pursue more of it. That's all.
Okay.
I first want to speak to what the gentleman was saying about seeing more entrepreneurship in the African American, specifically to the African American community. We've always had entrepreneurs, especially for black women. How many of you in here had a mother, aunt, whatever, who even if she had a full-time job, she was baking cakes on the side, she was making gift baskets, she was doing hair in the kitchen. So we've always been entrepreneurs, especially for African American women in our communities for generations. Now I want to speak to the issue of technology and entrepreneurship. For black women, we are trying to get into the technology sector as entrepreneurs because, for one, we are having problems getting in as employees. And when we do get in, we have to deal with the microaggressions and the old boy network in the tech industry. Now, as being tech entrepreneurs, the issues that we are facing are lack of access to capital. $1.3 million is an average for a startup company, failed startup company, that's owned by typically a white male. It's $36,000 in venture capital funds for a black woman who starts a tech company. And the reason for that is because a lot of venture capitalists don't see black women tech entrepreneurs as worth investing in. So I'm speaking to those points because these are the stats. We are trying to go into technology, especially for black women. And we're still going into it regardless of the fact that we aren't getting the type of venture capital that we need. It's less than 20 black women in this country who have raised $1 million or more in venture capital funds compared to how many has it been for white men and other people.
Okay, and we're talking here, then I guess you could talk about banks, hedge funds, people you go
Venture
to
capital,
for capital.
yes, venture capital funds.
Let me swing this microphone the other way. Do you have a microphone? Or somebody should walk around with the microphone. That would help me out. All right, let me have that one. Oh, okay. So somebody over here wanted to get in.
So I just wanted to point out that in 2020, there will be 1 million more tech jobs than there are Americans who have the education to hold those jobs. And we never talk about that number, but it's a real number, and 2020 is around the corner. That's the first thing. Second thing is...
Well, stick on that for a second, because that's such an amazing point. That people aren't ready to take jobs that you believe or know exist.
That's exactly right. That we do not have enough American people who will be ready in 2020 to take those entry-level jobs in that field.
And what does that say about minority interest and wealth gap?
Well, it says we're going to have more problems than we already have. But, I mean, I think the reality is that this is a multifaceted problem. Like, you know, everybody wants to say, well, it's this or it's that or it's, you know, we need more kids in STEM. Yes. We have a program at MMTC where we go to teenagers and basically say, look, major in tech because all the cool things you love to do derive from tech. And guess what? We know some people who have internships so you can start this out earlier in your career. But, I mean, to say that you know, in the tech area, a lot of times they'll say, we can't find anybody. And, you know, what's really funny is, yeah, this sector has grown really fast, but a lot of the things they say are like the things they said when it was your grandmother's time. We can't find any qualified people of color. You can find my keys. You can find my phone. You can find me right now in this room, but you can't find any people that look like me that can do these jobs. So, I mean, I think we have to treat it as a multi-layered problem with multi-layered solutions rather than just saying it's just this. I mean, if you think about it, like people always say you hire in your comfort zone. In Silicon Valley, okay, they're hiring in their comfort zone, but guess what? There's only one company, Intel, that celebrates Martin Luther King's birthday. Why do you think that is? So what is that? Is that racism? What does that mean? And why is it that people, I mean, that didn't even get covered. But they put a lot of money into their workforce, but they also made it a holiday. Well, why isn't it a holiday in Silicon Valley? I thought it was a federal holiday in this part of the country. Everybody gets it off. So, I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves, you know, when people say, oh, it's not racial, oh, it's our comfort zone, oh, we have to say it's all these things, and we need to deal with them all.
But I want to come back to what you're saying, that you believe, though, that if people prepare themselves, your organization, is able to even facilitate that pipeline, internships you spoke of, job opportunities. Given the racist stuff that we heard about earlier, that people feel racism is very real.
No, it's real.
Is that an insurmountable obstacle, or, as we heard earlier, just an obstacle that, you know what, for generations we've been overcoming obstacles?
Well, I'm with her. You know, my mother used to say, if you have a plan A and that doesn't work, you go to plan B. I mean, you don't give up. I guess that's, you know, for the young people who've been coming, you know, when they say, oh, I'm going to owe all this money. My mother was like, well, what better thing can you invest in than you? What's more valuable than you? If you buy an awesome, expensive car and somebody runs into it, it's useless. But if you put $100,000 into your education, I mean, I remember borrowing a lot of money for school, and when I see kids now, and they're like, oh, it's just so much money. And I just think to myself, well, even if I don't give it back, I still have the education. They can't really come and repossess it. So I just, you know, I mean, I think it is a generational mindset. I am saying that if you are prepared, we do need to give people some options. It's not the only thing we do at Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Intercouncil, but I added it because I hated that I was coming to these events and young people were standing up and saying, I'm interested in tech, but what do I do? Where do I go? So we created this day at UDC, and we invite kids from all over, from Baltimore, wherever. We're streaming it now so we can get to other kids to let them know that there are companies out there that have internships for them, and that if they have the right majors, and the other thing that nobody's been mentioning is that they speak the language of the employers, because, right, you can have that tech degree, the engineering degree from Howard, but if you don't speak the tech speak when you interview, you're still not going to get the job. So we got to let them know that all these things are out there and that these are things they have to be prepared for.
Well, thanks, because that's a pretty optimistic message.
Top of the day, do I need to stand up with they be disrespectful? The bottom line is this, in my opinion, and I happen to be a behavior neuroscientist, and I work with a lot of young people and people in the military. The brother just laid it out there. We play these games with ourselves, all our polished euphemisms. Institutional racism is alive and well. And your thesis that you were talking about, the family and the moms and dads, trust me, women get frustrated when they do not have a companion to go home to, whatever their preferences are. Their children, they see it. And whether you like it or not, young men need to see men. You see African-American men, when you see us in the news, if we're in the news, we've either committed a crime or we're a superstar athlete or we have done something in entertainment. You do not give African-American men the opportunity, and we need to be candid and deal with that reality, why America's willing to spend more money to incarcerate black men and brown men than she's willing to put a little bit of change on the table to be educated. And the other thing I want to say to you young blood is this. The bottom line is this, my brother. Any African-American that has incarnated in the shores of US of A and he has any remote association with thinking that his mother and father have been enslaved, you should be able to go to school for damn free. They owe you. You should not be in debt. They owe you. If you got the academics, you should be allowed to go to school for free. And the bottom line around STEM, they've also added the A for art, all right? So you need to be able to get inside of yourself and not become possessed by the technology they put in place for you to distract you from your destiny. And like the brothers say, spoken word is interactive. You need to transcend sitting down, getting wrapped up in video games, and getting jacked up by these video games to keep you from thinking, because it's all by design. The bottom line is also they're making marijuana legal for the vanilla brothers to sell so the good old boys can stay on top of their game. When you were slinging rocks on the corner, they were giving you more time than Amtrak has rails. More time than Mattel has toys. But as soon as these white boys start selling drugs, they made it legal, they changed the game. So be in touch. It's frustrating to go home to a house that is a house because it will never be a home if it ain't no family vibe there.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, I don't know if I can follow up on that, but
Yeah,
I
you can do it, you can do it.
Yes.
He brought it strong, but
yes.
we believe in you.
Right, and I want to just follow up on her point as well. The STEM programs are in public high schools in Prince George's County. So, and this is the age of technology. You just can go on a computer and find out about all these STEM programs, and many of them are free. Last summer at the University of District of Columbia, Verizon supported a STEM program for young black males starting at the 6th grade. You know, so a lot of times we have these programs. We have a very vibrant STEM program at the University of District of Columbia. In fact, last week at the national STEM competition in Louisiana, we won first place. But you don't hear any of this in the Washington Post. And so I think that with the computers, go online, search out these opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities out there. And do not forget about the historical black colleges and universities. We are getting a lot of resources, but of course, our enrollments are diminishing. For example, at the University of District of Columbia, we have a Master's in Homeland Security program. We have received millions of dollars from Homeland Security. And about 70% of our enrollment now are international students. They're not African Americans, and the program was created to be a pipeline for the Center of Excellence
very quickly,
to help
why?
African Americans. Because people are not enrolling.
No, why? Why?
Well, because first of all, we have certain perceptions about certain schools. Okay, that's one reason. And so we don't even think about looking at the opportunities at those schools. Okay. You know, and Homeland Security is, no matter how you feel, that's where the jobs are going to be in the future.
Well, let me just say also, since our host
and
is...
it's related to STEM.
Well, let me just say, since our host is Comcast, that I should mention, there's the lady for the microphone, that, in fact, they have an Internet Essentials program that, for low-income families, will put the computer in the house and open the door to some of these STEM experiences that can lead to jobs. Yes?
Hi, I'm thankful for the brother here who I kind of was feeling him on. We need to, not saying that we shouldn't talk about STEM and all those, because education, all that is very important. That is our key, especially the great leveling field. But we can't forget about, as the brothers have mentioned, the black males, especially, not just black males, people who've been incarcerated. Of course, we know we can go over a whole bunch of statistics, but as Mr. Clyburn said, it takes 6 to 7 years when we start talking about legislation. We need to talk about, I think that's from what I've heard last, an issue, a consensus that both sides of the aisle can go for. So we need to talk about getting those brothers who've been in jail for selling rocks and nonviolent crimes. I know the Holder administration and Loretta Lynch, they were big on trying to reduce that. But that's something we need to work forward, because I was looking out the window here and I see all these cranes, and if y'all live in DC, you know that Southwest DC, they're doing tons of development here. And people, those are basic construction jobs. And I'm not sure about the whole policy that the district has, but they have this thing about checking the box if you've been convicted of a felony or not. And they're building literally like 70, 80 buildings there. And they have to bring in workers because people can't get hired because they've been arrested and stuff like that. And I know he's a saint to others and a sinner to some, but Mr. Berry, our former mayor, made sure when development happened and contracts happened, the people who got hired looked like us. And we need to make sure of that. And I will commend the brother here who's doing his thing. Don't let anyone ever tell you what you can and can't do, because you have the whole world in front of you, okay? And I know our number 44 is working especially with young black males. And it's essential, especially in a place like Washington, D.C., where we're a few blocks from the Capitol. You go probably, I think, east of the river there. It's night and day. And many of you know that, because some of you wouldn't even walk or live there or drive through there, you know? And so just be mindful, consider all the things we've said, especially about the prison pipeline. That is so important. And my last point is, especially in the African-American community, we need to do more social justice activism, especially through our churches. Churches are failing us big time. They're 70% women, 30% usually controlled by men and all, but they are failing us with these men coming in and out of jail, because we need to be lobbying people like Mr. Clyburn and our local level, especially on the state, when, like we're talking about, we're going to jail for all these crimes for committing, for selling all these, marijuana, and now it's becoming legal, and people will make millions. The government's gonna have a new tax base. So we just need to make sure that's a justice issue.
Okay, let me switch back to this side of the room. Hang on, I need a microphone. Do you have a microphone, Jamil?
Thank you so much. I'll be as brief as possible, okay? Team Contrarian right up in here. First of all, as Thurgood Marshall let us know, you cannot legislate morality, okay? It's the right thing to hire him. It's the right thing to be equal. No, you can't legislate morality, but you can certainly legislate what your behavior must be. We know that when I show up and I do a damn great job in the same job that, Chet does, he's gonna out-earn me. Happy Equal Pay Day, ladies. He's gonna out-earn me. We know that when those cuts come and layoffs happen, I am the last hired, I'm going to be the first let go. We know that the wages are suppressed when you start hiring more people who look like I do. So what do we do then? We need to take this, yes, it's a justice issue, absolutely, brother, you're right, but this is also an issue of, we need to pressure our legislators. What have we the hell to lose, asked 45? Well, I'll tell you what. If Google makes its money and gets its tax breaks in this country, there needs to be a certain amount of American workers who would have an entitlement, who can get trained to work at Google. You mean to tell me that Google, which has an outpost here in DC, has an outpost in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and a lot of other places where you have educated African Americans who are underemployed, and other people too, but I come from enslaved ancestry. That's who I'm speaking of. Everybody else can speak for themselves, not being racist, being pro-me. You need to make it such that these companies have the mandate. You make your money on American shores, you hire Americans. You hire the Americans who are disenfranchised. That needs to be a policy plank that I'm not hearing anybody talk about. On Equal Pay Day, we have to talk about the fact that women go into these jobs. White women at Google have said, hey, we're dealing with issues of sexual harassment here. White women in newsrooms too, not looking at anybody. You know, this old boys network disenfranchises us. When we have babies, which 45 says is, you know, a detriment to the employer. When we, you know, have the next generation and we, you know, go home to raise up these babies and come back, we suffer a penalty that we often live longer than we can make up. So what we need to be doing is talking about what are the policies that we need to put in place to mitigate this very real situation that human behavior hasn't solved for. That's number one. Number two, I have an 8-year-old. He's awesome. And if he were here, I would say, honey, are you going to college? He will tell you, I'm going to MIT. I'd say, are you allowed to take out loans? He'd say, no. I would say, is mommy paying for your school? He'd say, no. And I'd say, so what you got to do is I have to get a scholarship, or I have to start a business, or I have to, you know, I was going to sell him to the Disney plantation, but that's not going to happen. He sings well, but this is a policy thing. There are people who are working on this, and I think that we need to be connecting more of these dots, and those dots need to happen down the street here and up the street here. And all of these businesses that are, you know, billionaire makers have a responsibility for those in this country who have been disenfranchised and cannot otherwise get on a plane and go to Menlo Park.
Hand the microphone.
Mr. Williams, I can't follow the sister, but I can echo what you just said, that is, today is Equal Pay Day. I'm the vice president of the Women's National Democratic Club. Men are also members. That's the woman, nearly 100 years ago, founded by suffragette women at DuPont Circle. Here's my point and question. The focus has been here principally on the wage gap. But related to that is also something called the income gap. And that's real, and that's what equal pay is about. My point fundamentally, and I'll conclude on this note swiftly, is that women suffer a pay gap. People of color suffer a pay gap. Wealth, yes, but a pay gap also, an income gap. And there is a way, several ways, by legislation with the raising the minimum wage, et cetera, making it a living wage. But there's another way, historically in our nation, that Democrats established under President Franklin Roosevelt, the National Labor Relations Act, encouraging, indeed endorsing collective bargaining and the formation of strong unions, that it was legal to join and you were guaranteed the right to be represented in the workplace, to even the balance with the boss, with the owner, to fight for equal pay, if you will, fair pay, enough pay, and Mr. Williams, out of enough pay, also that's an income stream source for improving the wealth gap. So for women, for people of color, let's also look to strengthening collective bargaining legal rights in America.
All right, next to you.
Okay, I have two different things to talk about, the STEM and the racism thing. I think one thing we're not honest about, and it was going to be a question about the museum, and it's something that black people and white people agree not to talk about, which is slavery. For very different reasons, we would prefer not to talk about it. If you talk about it, you get to the reparations issue, which was brought up. So that's one reason. And ironically, we're not comfortable going back over that period. We may be getting more comfortable, but there was a big discussion about it when the museum was coming up. Are people going to feel so badly? People who are privileged as a result of slavery. Are they going to feel badly? Will that work as a museum? And of course, they managed to do it in such a way that that wasn't true. Governor Wilder was working on a slavery museum. He was going to have it in Virginia. And I told him, I said, what should happen is a family comes in and then they never see each other again. That would give them a sense of what it was like to be separated out like that. So I think we can't ever actually get to the racism issue if we have to be quiet about the slavery issue. And I think there's a lesson there about the Holocaust that we should be able to understand, because they never stop putting that out front. And yet they're able to go forward. I don't think the strategy of, well, let's just act like it didn't happen is a strategy that's working. On the other side, with respect to STEM, I'm a consultant now, but for 22 years, I was the #2 person at Howard. I used all my chits before I left to create a middle school 11 years ago, a middle school of math and science, okay? That middle school caused me to understand something about what was going on in DC schools. I can't speak for any place else. The kids come in by lottery. We test them after they are admitted. You cannot test them. This was a charter school. You could not test them beforehand. 40% of the kids who were supposed to be rising 6th grade students were actually reading and doing math at the 2nd grade level. I had a meeting with 500 5th grade teachers to find out, how's this possible? I mean, I got the transcripts, you guys had them. You said they were rising 6th grade students. They're not. Quiet in the room, and then finally one teacher stood up and said, the parents of charter school kids, or parents, it might be true for all of DC public schools, are very political. They do not want to hear that their kid needs to be retained in a grade. So we've decided that it is easier for us to pass them along than it is to confront their parents. So right in DC, the nation's capital, we have a something that we never talk about, but that will hold these kids back, at least the ones in the middle school. And the last thing I'd say is the record.
That's such a powerful story, and it's not white people, it's black teachers over
right, but what I'm saying is, it is still true that the parents of these kids, I'm not saying they're bad people, the teachers are afraid. You cannot teach someone you're afraid of.
Okay. Well, I hear, again, so many angles to this story. How much time do we have left? 0. Okay. All right. Let me just then ask 3 people to help us wrap up. And 3 people that we haven't heard from. Mr. Khan, I wanted to ask you if you would give us some of your final thoughts, having heard this conversation, various angles, but again, we come back to the idea of opportunity for Americans of all colors.
Well, I'm so privileged to be even sitting here. I came to pay tribute to the audience, just giving me the privilege to stand and to sit among them. This conversation needs to be continued, and I fully agree that the first lesson starts from home and it continues. That is what we have practiced at our home. Thank God both of our sons are scientists, and we insisted there are opportunities. Just look at the visa system. One of my elegant sister mentioned about technology hires. Thousands of visas are issued to bring in people from outside because our young men and women are not ready to take over. And it takes only 6 months of basic training to be employed in the technology area. So my humble request will be to all these leaders to start small programs within communities. African American community is amazingly resourceful community. Start small groups where we begin to train our young folks, our leaders. And believe me, I apologize to our African American men sitting here. This leadership and the solution will come from African American women. I admire their leadership throughout the history. They have risen to the occasion. History is witness to that. This country is witness to that. We are witnessing their leadership. So I humbly request that they should take the lead, create small institutions, small institutes, small training programs to guide our community, to lead our young men and women in the direction, because future is unlimited. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your presence. And you have young people here from the Aspen Institute.
No, we have Richard Wright, School of Journalism, high school students, and we also have students from George Mason University.
Why don't we ask one of them to join? Do you know, would you pick one for me? This young lady here raised her hand.
So I just wanted to say something back onto what these gentlemen had said earlier. One, I think they put so much money into the jails because they get the money right back out of the jails. When people are going into the jails, you have white people who own these jails, and they need the people in the jails so that they can get their money right back into their pockets. And also, what I wanted to say was, I was listening to all the conversations today, taking down information. I was listening, and everybody's talking about what adults can do for younger children, what the blacks can do for the white, what the whites can do for the blacks, the Latinos for the black, and so on and so forth. And my question was just, why is everybody else sitting at a table trying to discuss something that doesn't affect them? Yes, they can help, but if you aren't at the table with the problem that affects you, what are you actually getting done? I feel like that's something that needs to be brought up. I feel like enough people aren't sitting at the table when they should really be. If you're not allowed at the table, I was told, if you're not allowed at the table, you are allowed at the table, and bring a fold-up chair if need be, so that you could be at the table having that discussion.
Well, that's what this is about. We're having the discussion. Where's Charlie? Is Charlie still here? Charlie, why don't you wrap us up with your final thoughts on this moment?
Well, thanks.
And this 7th year.
Yes, thanks, and thanks to everybody. You know, this is all about participation among you and a broader community. Fortunately, we were trending nationally on Twitter, so there was a broader community engaged in this discussion, not at the level here. And I want to thank all of the panelists, the moderators, did a terrific job, and thanks again to Klahna and her staff who really put it all together. And finally, a shout out and thanks to Comcast and the great crew there that has been supporting this from the very beginning, and a great partner. So thanks everybody, and lunchtime.